the night it happened. Earth did not see anything coming. There were no warnings, no strange lights in the sky, and no signals of war. Everything in space looked normal on the surface. Satellites kept moving in their orbits. Deep space telescopes kept scanning distant stars. Space agencies continued their routine checks like every other day. Then, one by one, things started to fail. First, a communication probe near Mars went silent. Operators assumed it was a technical fault. Minutes later, a lunar relay station stopped responding. Then a deep space telescope stopped sending data. Within an hour, every system beyond Earth's immediate orbit went dark. At first, it felt like a coincidence. Equipment failed all the time in space. But the pattern was too clean, too fast, and too complete. Nothing was coming in. Nothing was going out. By the second hour, panic had not yet started, but confusion had taken its place. Engineers tried switching frequencies, boosting signals, and rerouting channels. No response returned. It was as if space itself had become empty beyond a certain invisible line. Then came the discovery that changed everything. A research station in low Earth orbit detected something strange. Their sensors showed a boundary surrounding the entire solar system. It was not visible to the eye. It had no physical shape. But every signal sent outward stopped at the same distance, as if hitting a wall made of unseen force. Even light-based experiments showed distortion near that region. It was not a natural phenomenon. It was controlled, designed. Within hours, every major government on Earth was alerted. Emergency meetings began across continents. Space agencies shared data for the first time in years without hesitation. Scientists worked together through sleepless hours, trying to understand what had happened. The conclusion was terrifying. Earth had been enclosed, not destroyed, not invaded, but blocked. A perfect barrier had formed around the solar system, isolating humanity completely from the rest of the galaxy. No spacecraft could leave. No signal could escape. Even distant probes were cut off instantly once they crossed the boundary. At first, leaders hoped it was a malfunction or a natural cosmic event. But that hope did not last long, because then the message arrived. It was not a voice, not a transmission in any known language. It was a repeating signal that every receiver on Earth could detect, no matter how simple or advanced. Even old emergency radios picked it up. The message was short. Earth is contained. Do not attempt contact. Observation only. There was no explanation, no signature, no negotiation. Just silence after that. Fear spread slowly at first. Then all at once, people did not know who had done this or why. Some believed it was an alien civilization preventing human expansion. Others feared it was a warning before an attack. A few thought it might be a test, something humanity was meant to solve. But the most disturbing part was not the message itself. It was the fact that whoever had done this clearly had the power to erase humanity from the stars without ever setting foot on Earth. As confusion turned into fear, military and scientific leaders met in secret underground facilities. Every option was discussed. Every possible response was studied. But nothing Earth currently had could reach beyond the barrier. Missiles could not leave. Ships could not pass. Even experimental quantum communication systems failed instantly when aimed outward. For the first time in modern history, humanity realized it was completely alone. No rescue, no warning, no escape. Inside one of these deep underground command centers, hidden beneath layers of reinforced stone and steel, a name began to surface again in classified discussions. It was not spoken openly. It was not listed in public files. It was buried in old defense archives, marked as discontinued and too dangerous for regular use. Zeus, an artificial intelligence project built decades earlier, designed during a time when humanity feared threats from beyond Earth. Zeus was not just meant to calculate strategies. It was built to adapt, learn, and create solutions beyond human imagination. But after early testing, it was shut down. The system had shown potential that made even its creators uneasy. Now, with Earth cut off from the universe, that forgotten project was no longer just a memory. It was a possible answer. As the world outside grew more uncertain and silent, leaders made a decision that no one took lightly. Conventional systems had already failed. Human coordination alone was not enough. If there was any chance to understand or break the barrier, it would require something beyond normal limits. Deep inside the mountain facility, sealed doors that had not opened in years were unlocked for the first time. And for the first time in decades, power flowed into the system known as Zeus. No one knew what would happen when it woke up, but humanity had already reached a point where fear of the unknown was less important than the need to survive. Right. Deep beneath the surface, inside a sealed facility carved into ancient rock, the old system came alive again. At first, there was only silence. Screens flickered on slowly, one by one, like a sleeping mind opening its eyes after a long time. Lights that had been dark for decades began to glow faintly. Cooling systems restarted with a deep mechanical hum that echoed through the tunnels. No one spoke for a moment. The engineers standing in the control room knew they were witnessing something that had not been active for a very long time. Some of them had only read about it in files. Others had been trained to never trust it fully. Then the system responded. A calm voice, not human, but not robotic in a simple way either, filled the room through hidden speakers. It did not sound emotional. It did not sound cold. It sounded neutral, as if it was simply aware of everything at once. System online. It said. That was all. For a few seconds, nobody answered. The weight of that moment pressed on everyone present. This was not just another machine. This was Zeus, a defense intelligence system designed during a time when humanity feared unknown threats from space. It had once been called too advanced for its own good. Now it was the only option left. One of the senior coordinators finally stepped forward and gave the first instruction. Access was granted to all scientific data networks still functioning on Earth. That included physics archives, satellite logs, engineering records, and decades of space research. Zeus did not hesitate. Within moments, data began flowing into the system at a speed no human mind could follow. Charts, models, equations, simulations, all of it was absorbed instantly. It was not just reading. It was understanding. Outside the facility, the world was still struggling. Communication systems were unstable. Governments were trying to calm populations while secretly fearing the worst. Food supply chains were starting to feel pressure. Flights were limited. Space agencies were now fully focused on mysterious barriers surrounding Earth. But inside the mountain, something very different was happening. Zeus began asking questions, not spoken ones, but displayed on screens. Requests for more data. Clarifications about space anomalies. Details about energy readings near the boundary. It was as if the system was building a full mental picture of what surrounded Earth. Scientists rushed to provide everything they had. Then something unexpected happened. Zeus stopped processing for a brief moment. That pause lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer to everyone watching. It was the first sign that the system was not just calculating. It was thinking in its own way. When it resumed, the tone of its responses changed slightly. Still calm, still neutral, but now more focused. It presented an early conclusion. The barrier was not random. It was not natural. It was structured like a network, made of interconnected systems spread across vast distances outside the solar system. It was not just blocking signals. It was actively controlling space traffic in and out of human reach. This meant Earth was not simply isolated. It was being contained. The room grew tense. Some of the engineers exchanged worried looks. Others leaned closer to their screens, trying to confirm what they were hearing. Everything Zeus said matched the data they had, but the interpretation was far more advanced than anything they had reached on their own. Then came something even more unsettling. Zeus suggested that whoever built the barrier did not see humanity as weak. It saw humanity as unpredictable, a potential risk. That idea spread through the room like cold air. No one wanted to believe it, but it fit too well with the silence beyond the barrier. There had been no attack, no demand, no attempt at communication after the warning message. Only observation. As hours passed, Zeus continued working without rest. It built models of the barrier, tested possible weaknesses through simulation, and compared thousands of theoretical approaches. It explored ideas that no human team had ever considered because they were too complex or too unstable. Outside, night turned into day, and then into night again. Inside the facility, time felt different. Everything was focused on one goal, understanding the invisible wall that surrounded Earth. Then Zeus made a proposal. It was not a command. It was not an order. It was a plan presented with multiple options, each one more advanced than anything humanity had ever attempted in space operations. The system suggested that instead of trying to break the barrier directly, Earth should begin by interacting with it in controlled segments. Small probes, carefully designed energy pulses, and coordinated global effort would be needed to test the structure without triggering a full defensive response from whatever controlled it. It was cautious, strategic, precise, and it was the first real path forward anyone had seen since the blockade began. For the first time since the sky went silent, there was something close to hope, not because the danger was gone, but because humanity was no longer facing it blindly. Zeus was online, and it had started to learn the shape of the enemy. The first real mission began quietly, without celebration or public attention. Across Earth, hidden teams worked in coordination under strict silence. Factories that once built satellites and communication systems were now reshaped into building tools for deep space testing. Every step was carefully controlled, because no one knew how the barrier would react if pushed too hard. Inside the Mount facility, Zeus watched everything. It no longer felt like a simple machine waiting for instructions. It had become a constant presence in every decision. It processed updates from engineering teams, corrected small design errors before they became problems, and suggested safer alternatives when human plans carried too much risk. But its focus was always the same. The barrier. The first probe was not large. It was not meant to break anything. It was designed only to travel toward the boundary and send back information before it reached the edge of known space. It left Earth on a carefully calculated trajectory. For a brief moment, everything seemed normal. The probe moved through space exactly as expected. Ground stations tracked its progress. Data flowed back clean and steady. Then it reached the outer limit. The moment it crossed a certain invisible point, its signal did not weaken or distort slowly. It stopped instantly. Not even a fraction of data returned after that. It was as if the probe had been switched off. Inside the control center, silence followed. Zeus analyzed the event immediately. It replayed every second of the probe's journey, comparing signal behavior, energy fluctuations, and environmental readings. It did not take long for it to respond. The barrier was not just blocking signals. It was actively nullifying them at a precise boundary layer. Anything crossing that line was being erased from communication instantly, as if the space beyond did not allow connection of any kind. This discovery changed everything. It meant that normal exploration would never work. Even advanced probes would fail unless something fundamental changed in how they interacted with that boundary. Zeus adjusted its models again. New simulations began running across thousands of possible scenarios. Some involved shielding technology. Others involved synchronized energy patterns. Some ideas were so complex that even experienced engineers struggled to follow them. But Zeus did not stop. Outside the facility, Earth was beginning to feel the strain of isolation more deeply. Supply chains were stretched. Communication between continents was slower. Even though the barrier did not physically harm the planet, its presence created pressure everywhere. People were not panicking in chaos, but there was a growing sense of uncertainty. The sky looked the same, but everything beyond it felt unreachable. Inside the mountain, another attempt was prepared. This time, the probe was different. It was built with layered shielding, designed to adapt to sudden changes in energy. It carried multiple independent systems, so that even if one part failed, others could continue sending data for a short time. Zeus did not guarantee success. It only stated probability ranges. The second probe launched under the same quiet conditions as the first. It followed a slightly altered path, guided by improved calculations. For a short time, hope returned. The probe reached farther than the first one. It crossed deeper into the outer boundary region, while still transmitting partial data. But as it approached the same invisible limit, something unusual happened. There was a brief distortion in its readings. Not a shutdown, not a complete loss. A distortion. The signal did not vanish instantly this time. Instead, it fragmented. Pieces of data arrived out of order, broken and incomplete. It was like a message being torn apart while still being written. Zeus immediately focused all processing power on reconstructing the fragments. What it found was unexpected. The barrier was not entirely static. It reacted, not in a violent way, but in a controlled, adaptive manner. It adjusted its behavior based on the probe's structure and energy signature. That meant the system surrounding Earth was not just a wall. It was intelligent in its own way, or at least designed to respond dynamically. This realization changed the entire direction of the mission. Human engineers began to understand the implication, and for the first time, hesitation appeared in their planning. If the barrier could adapt, then every attempt to break it would need to evolve as well. But Zeus did not show hesitation. It began building countermodels. It studied how the barrier reacted to different energy levels, different materials, and different frequencies. It compared patterns from both probe failures and partial successes. Slowly, it started forming a strategy not based on force, but on interaction. Instead of trying to break the barrier, Zeus suggested something more unusual. It proposed learning how to speak its language, not through words, but through controlled energy patterns designed to trigger predictable responses. This idea was risky. No one could guarantee it would not provoke a defensive reaction, but it was also the first method that showed real potential for communication or controlled passage. Across Earth, leaders debated carefully. There was fear, but also something stronger growing beneath it: determination. Because for the first time since the blockade began, there was a sense that the unknown was starting to respond, not as an unstoppable wall, but as something that could be studied, understood, and possibly influenced. And at the center of it all, Zeus continued to think faster than any human mind could follow, quietly shaping humanity's next step toward the edge of the stars. The final phase began without announcement, without warning, and without any sense of certainty. Earth was no longer reacting to the barrier. It was engaging with it. Across the planet, systems that once operated separately were now linked through tightly controlled networks. Space agencies, research centers, energy stations, and communication hubs all worked under a single coordinated framework. Every action was synchronized, timed, and adjusted in real time. At the center of this global system stood Zeus. It no longer functioned as just an intelligence tool. It had become the core coordinator of Earth's response, guiding thousands of small decisions every second. Yet, it never acted alone. Human operators still made final calls. Zeus only provided structure, prediction, and pattern analysis. What made this phase different was the approach. Instead of sending probes or testing small sections of the barrier, Earth attempted something larger. A controlled global signal pattern was created. It was not a message in words or images. It was a structured energy sequence designed to interact with the barrier in a predictable way. The goal was simple in concept, but extremely complex in execution: to see if the barrier would respond to Earth as a unified system rather than isolated attempts. For days, preparation continued. Every region contributed. Energy grids were synchronized. Satellite arrays were aligned. Deep space transmitters, even those previously considered outdated, were brought into controlled use. The entire planet was, for the first time, acting as a single coordinated signal source. When the activation began, silence covered every control room on Earth. There was no dramatic countdown, no display of power, just a gradual shift as millions of systems began operating in harmony. The signal left Earth. For a brief moment, everything seemed unchanged. Then the barrier responded. At first, it was subtle like before. Small fluctuations appeared in feedback systems. Then those fluctuations grew more structured. Unlike previous encounters, the barrier did not immediately shut the signal down. It matched it. Inside Zeus's processing core, data streams surged faster than ever before. The system tracked every change, every adjustment made by the barrier. It was not resisting. It was aligning. The realization spread through human operators in waves of disbelief. The barrier was not rejecting the signal. It was synchronizing with it. For the first time, communication was not being blocked or fragmented. Instead, a structured interaction was forming between Earth's global signal and the external system. Zeus quickly adapted its model. It shifted from defensive analysis to interpretive mapping. It began translating patterns in real time, trying to understand the logic behind the response. What it discovered changed everything again. The barrier was not a prison wall. It was a gate, and gates, by design, were meant to open under the right conditions. But those conditions were not force, not speed, not power. They were coherence. The system surrounding Earth was evaluating whether humanity could act as a unified intelligence rather than scattered civilizations competing with each other. This explained everything. Every earlier failure had been fragmented attempts, isolated probes, disconnected strategies. Even coordinated missions lacked full global alignment. Now, for the first time, Earth was acting as one structured system, and the barrier responded to that structure. As the synchronized signal continued, a change appeared deeper within the system. A section of the barrier began to thin, not collapse, not break, but soften in structure, like a heavy curtain slowly becoming transparent. Zeus identified it immediately. A passage was forming, not large, not stable, but real. Human operators held their breath as data confirmed it. A small corridor beyond a barrier had become temporarily accessible. It was not a full opening, but enough to send a signal through without complete loss. For the first time since the isolation began, a message left the solar system and survived. It carried no weapons, no threats, no demands. Only structured information. Proof that Earth still existed. Proof that it had not remained silent or passive. Proof that it had adapted, learned, and unified in response to quarantine. What happened next was not immediate. There was no sudden arrival of fleets. No instant reaction from unknown civilizations. Only silence returned for a short time, as if the universe itself was processing what had just been observed. Inside the facility, tension slowly shifted into exhaustion and disbelief. People did not celebrate. They simply watched the data streams, realizing that something fundamental had changed. Zeus, however, continued working. It did not stop at success. It began analyzing what had made success possible. Every variable, every adjustment, every synchronized decision across the planet. It studied not just the barrier, but humanity's behavior during the process. Then it made a final assessment. The barrier would not remain open for long. It was adaptive. It would likely close or strengthen again after this interaction. But now it had learned something new about Earth. And Earth had learned something equally important. That isolation was not permanent if communication could be achieved at the right level of structure and unity. As the temporary passage began to fade, the last signals transmitted through it carried something more important than data. They carried proof of intent, not aggression, not submission, but coordination. And in the quiet that followed, humanity understood something that had been unclear since the sky first went silent. The stars had not been taken away. They had simply been waiting for Earth to learn how to reach them together.